I would like to thank SafeJourney for this opportunity to be here talking with Sascha, who is such knowledgeable person in this field. And before I introduce Sascha, I will do a disclaimer. Although I'm here as a psychiatrist, I am in fact a psychiatrist, but I'm not a psychologist or a psychotherapist, so I'm not an expert in psychotherapies and nor in body psychotherapies, which are a specific branch with a specific knowledge and area of studies and practices. So my questions will be hopefully beginner questions that all of you may have. So I hope they are interesting enough to keep your attention. Sascha is a clinical psychologist. She's been working as a psychologist for a while. She has trained in Mind Foundation with in this field of integration of altered states of consciousness experiences. And her main area of work now is body psychotherapies, and that's why she's here to tell us more about this fascinating field. Do you want to say any other words, Sascha?
I wanted to say actually thank you for inviting me here. It's a pleasure to be here and to be able to speak on this topic, which I didn't realize was such a hot topic at the moment. So I hope that I have some insights to share that will be useful for everybody. And I'm curious what's coming, because Medium told me today she had all new questions. So it's going to be a surprise for me as well.
So my first question, Sascha, would be for someone who hasn't heard of body psychotherapies, who is not aware of this area, what would you say are the basics of this practice of body interventions and body psychotherapy?
The basis in terms of the foundations?
Mm-hmm.
Well, I guess the obvious answer to that is to talk a bit about how they evolved over time, where they stem from. That's always a bit of a complex question, because if we look at the way they developed in Europe, that's a bit distinct from the way they developed in the rest of the world. I would say that the actual foundations of somatic therapies in Europe are actually psychoanalytical, so Freudian, because Freud talked about a libido, a vital energy, and he started to talk about how this was influenced by developmental stages in children. And it was someone called Wilhelm Reich, who in the 30s, I believe, took all this Freudian therapy, and he said, this is all great, but it's not just a psychic energy, it's not just in the psyche. There is something in the body called orgone, and it's the equivalent of libido, and it's a real energy, a vital energy. And so he started to describe a theory of how that energy was affected by developmental psychology, so how our early years experiences kind of shape our body structure. He developed the term body armor, so how the way we are in the world represents the story of our life, how our body holds the story of not only our early childhood memories, but everything we've ever experienced psychologically, physiologically, we've inherently experienced through our body. So that was the foundation, was Reich in Europe. From that, there have been a lot of different branches. So often people are a bit overwhelmed when they start to understand how many subcategories there are of somatic psychology, right? Because when you have this kind of foundational understanding of the inextricable link, I would call it, between mind, body, and consciousness, many practices fit into this. So you have things like bioenergetic therapy, which is very cathartic therapy to release muscle tensions, but you also have more modern therapies such as somatic experiencing or TRE, trauma release therapy. But then in the East, so moving a bit away from Europe, these things have been, I think, more embedded in the wisdom of the culture for years and years and years, right? So there wasn't so much a turning point where body psychotherapy or somatic therapies became acknowledged. They, practices such as Ayurveda, traditional Chinese medicine, all of these cultures actually, they do not distinguish so much between mind and body and consciousness. They didn't suffer from Descartes' scission the way we did here. And they very much view somatic practices as embedded in the process of working the psyche and working your spiritual dimension of life. So there's a much more integrative approach there, which is also, I think, being more and more recognized here in even in clinical contexts. So you even have integrative psychologists now. But that I would say are the kind of the main perspectives in which you can say somatic techniques have evolved. So there's the more kind of, I think, what falls into a more clinical space. Here in Europe now, there's body psychotherapy and there's specific psychotherapies, but then there's all the mind-body techniques that come, from all over the world, right? From yoga, tai chi, qigong, anything that involves your body is inherently a somatic practice, right?
So I think this links with my next question, which would be, how did you become interested in this kind of, in this area of psychotherapy? So you were a formed psychologist from the traditional university, and then how did you become in contact with this kind of field, and how did you decide to work through here?
Through here. Well, it's quite a personal question, actually. I think all these questions will be quite personal because I will give a heads up that I'm someone who feels a lot of alignment in my work. So often the things that I pursue in terms of learning or experiencing or broadening my knowledge are very close to what I'm pursuing in my own personal journey of development and growth and healing. So asking how I was first drawn to somatic therapies actually starts in my childhood. I have a transgenerational charge of war trauma, so I'm from Dutch descent, so I have a lot of war trauma in my family, which meant that I actually grew up in an environment which was very intentionally therapeutic in the light of that war trauma. So my parents practiced body psychotherapy. It was quite popular in the 80s, particularly in Holland. And so I always knew that there was a huge value in using the body in therapy. But I also knew that if I was going to really feel full freedom to explore that in clinical contexts, I also, I not only needed, but I wanted the clinical foundations to be able to do it in a very complete, informed way. So I studied neuroscience first, neuroscience and psychology and the biological sciences of psychology at Edinburgh University, but always with my eye on the day that I could start my psychotherapy training. And the second I was out of my bachelor's, I started doing training in body psychotherapy, but also anything I could get my hands on in terms of therapeutic yoga course and breathwork training. So I was always just soaking up as much as I could in terms of somatic tools, basically to complement my clinical psychology practice.
We will be maybe talking more about these tools that you mentioned, but before that, why do you think this kind of work is such a great fit or a great match with altered states of consciousness? What are the advantages of working with the body, or was it possible to not work with the body even?
You're right, yeah. That's a really good question. Is it possible to not work with the body? I like that Medium said that, because I don't actually think we can work with the body. Even in this conversation now, something is happening in all of your bodies by processing this information, right? So just to reiterate the question, it's...
Why do you think they fit so well with altered states?
With altered states, okay. Well, first of all, my definition of altered states of consciousness is quite a broad one. So I like to use the term psychedelic when I talk about altered states of consciousness, even ones that are not induced through substances, because I feel a motivation to destigmatize the word as well. But in my own practice, I work with non-substance induced altered states of consciousness in terms of facilitating them. So these are states induced through meditation, dance, breath work, and the work that I do in substance-induced contexts is purely the integration part, not the facilitation part. Just so that you understand where my knowledge starts and also where it stops. I don't facilitate substance-induced processes. But the reason I would say that somatic tools are so important is because a huge part of the altered states of consciousness that we experience in our life are inherently somatic, right? So from the second that we are born into this world, we're in a somatically induced altered state of consciousness. That's birth, right? And after that, from psychological states that we can undergo through psychological distress, through trauma, to sleep states, to sexual states. There's so many somatic states that we can experience in life that are inherently altered states of consciousness. And the idea I would like to introduce here is that we talk a lot about dosage with substances. So we'll say, okay, I'm going to do ketamine-assisted therapy. What dosage did I administer? But we never talk about dosage with somatic altered states, right? We never say, like, how hard did you dance? Was it like psychedelic dancing, or was it integration dancing? Was it calming dancing, right? And this, I think, is a very important notion, because somatic tools can be used to experience a psychedelic state, but they can also be used to prepare for that state. They're important tools during the experience itself to help you navigate that state, and they're, of course, essential in post-integration. In light of what you were saying, can you experience anything without experiencing it somatically? I also think it's important to emphasize that I have a very integrative approach to therapy and to integration. So I feel that the most constructive integration journeys, or the most constructive integration plans, are one that do not only focus on one dimension of a person, but on the various dimensions. And in the model that I follow, which is a model I developed with Amanda Efthymio, with my co-creator of the project, we talk about 4 essential dimensions, and that's the cognitive, the emotional, the physical, and the transpersonal. But there are other models of integration, which you all probably know, which also talk about the social, the environmental. So I feel that it's very important when we are integrating an altered state which will inherently touch upon or potentially modify all 4 of these dimensions, that we also help to integrate all 4 of these dimensions. Otherwise, we can end up, I'll give a hypothetical scenario. How many of you have heard someone go through an experience and say, wow, I had an amazing insight, and I know what I need to do, but I just don't feel it yet? Or I have an insight that this is something I really want to try, but actually my body is scared to do it, right? So this is a situation where I would say, okay, that's somebody who's maybe on a cognitive level, they don't need so much support with their integration, but maybe to create an alignment there between their thought and their feelings and their body, and eventually their spiritual values, they could do some somatic integration, right? So I could go on and on about how somatics are valuable.
Linked with another, which is another question I would have, which is when do you, or in which circumstances do people benefit more from a somatic work? or well, in the perspective of the person, if the person should seek this kind of work, or from the perspective of a therapist, some signs you should be aware that this person may be a lot focused on the cognitive dimension, and we could transition more to the physical. How can we integrate this?
So signs that someone might present when they show up to experience a psychedelic state that would indicate that somatic integration would be useful for them. Well, here the obvious answer is in terms of harm reduction and a trauma-informed approach. It's to assess in a very real way whether this person is experiencing anything in a somatic sense that needs support and that needs help, from indications that their nervous system could benefit from regulation practices, or from doing an assessment of their prior history in terms of traumatic experience. So you can identify things like potential trigger points, things that might put the body in a state of fight or flight again, things that might re-traumatize the body. But also, I think it's important here to note that there can be contraindications for psychedelic experiences themselves, and that people talk about all the time, right? Oh, you're pregnant, you probably shouldn't do this or that psychedelic experience. But I like to talk about contraindications for integration techniques, which people don't always acknowledge, right? They say, oh, integration is always great, but integration is not always linear, and it should be very, very individualized. So I would say doing an assessment with a specific person, actually assessing that. So asking them, how they're feeling, what they need, what their intentions are, but specifically around their body and their physiology. And then determining based on that what somatic practices would be the best for